Welcome to the National Gallery of Victoria. We are here to carry John Olsen shoulder high through cheering crowds. John, congratulations on a life's work. What is the source of this endless, boundless joy within you?
I didn't do it. Australia did it. And I'm enjoying to tell you this, that when I went to Spain in 1956, that Spain was still recovering from the most horrific wars that mankind can have, which is a civil war. And it was very poor and very, very isolated. And to be in Barcelona, where there were still shell marks on buildings, and so it was like that. It was a kind of a monument to what had occurred, and Barcelona in the Civil War was the last city to fall. And that was the climate. To go to Barcelona today, you can't believe it. I mean, when I saw Gaudi's Temple of the Holy Family, and it was just remained a shell of an outline, and I said to my friend that they will never build this. It's nearly finished. It's just remarkable. Now, why I say that this is the climate that I lived for several years in Spain. I lived in Daya, fortunately enough to be in, it just happened fortuitously, to be in the same village as Robert Graves. And I certainly learned a lot about poetry from Robert Graves, who just about finished his great Claudian novels, and of course Graves was a great poet. So there I was, and I'm still exercising my little trotters, you know, full of complex ideas, full of enthusiasm. And whilst I was in Spain, I was painting dark pictures. And can I tell you, Phillip, what happened to me when I subsequently came back to Australia? And it was evening, it was a summer's evening, and there used to be, I don't think it exists anymore in Sydney, but there was a night entertainment on a vessel called the Showboat. And this big liner that was coming from Spain, and there was sort of people dancing, and the saxophone played, and I thought, this is so different. And the enthusiasm that I subsequently felt about Australia, and somehow I stumbled on it, this is the You Beaut Country. This is a country that has never had a civil war, and wars have not been known in Australia. And furthermore, the other interesting thing for being an Australian artist or a musician, so on, it's full of possibilities because we are a new people in a very old continent. And when one considers, say, Europe, that's Italy with great artists, great architecture, cathedrals, France and so on, this is largely undiscovered. And the landscape, by the way, largely undiscovered.
Okay, these are the things that were coming into you, but I have to insist that there was within your core an optimism and a capacity for joy and jubilation.
I believe so. But there has to be a spark in the chord that emphasizes that, meaning this, that like, I believe in a sense of place. I don't believe that, say, international art is that everyone if there's abstract expressionism, if there's pop art or so on, that it necessarily relates worldwide. Because, like, real art has its roots somewhere. I'll put it this way to you. Can you imagine London without Dickens? Can one imagine Russia without Tolstoy? Can we imagine Picasso without a Mediterranean world? You cannot. So this sense of place, it's what you are. It's what you are and what you respond to. And certainly you should be influenced by everything. But in the end, it comes down to a sense of percolation in which that you are relating to what you are. And the difficulty is, I'll put it this way, to arrive at a proper synthesis.
Spain was still feeling the echoes of the Civil War. But you were born at a time when Australia was having the echoes of the Depression. For you to decide to become an artist seems a very provocative decision and must have been very alarming to the parents.
Oh, it's hopeless. I'll put it to you this way, that as a student, the top prices for Australian art was Drysdale 110 guineas and Dobell 100. Even if we use inflation on that, it seems to be an extraordinarily low figure. Well, I was down to 10 and 5s. So there were no grants, there was nothing like that. We did it because we loved it, and we were prepared to be poor all our lives. Little did I imagine this.
I was reading through some of the biographical notes, things about you I didn't know, and one of them I delighted in, and that was when you led a bit of a crusade against the Archibald Prize, which was then run by rather dull bureaucratic gentlemen in suits, and they'd given the, shall we say, the rather prim paintings of William Dargie the Archibald Prize year after year after year.
7 times.
7 times. You decided that was enough, and there was the other William, Dobell, who was more deserving. This led you into political activism and into song.
Well, I'll tell you about that, but first of all, what we ought to know, that the Art Gallery of New South Wales trustees were elected for life. And so consequently, the Archibald Prize was, like always, judged by them. That's part of the award. And so really good artists were being rejected from the Archibald Prize. And we artists, young artists, bit of a larrikin, we decided that we were going to have a demonstration in the courtyards where the Archibald Prize was. And we did placards like, "How much is that Dargie in the window?" "Don't hang Dargie, hang the trustees." Very studentish. And anyhow, and we walked up and down with these placards. The attendants didn't really know what to do. And then we left running for our lives with 3 cheers for Picasso. I put it to you. But then consequently, there was an exhibition later on in the Education Building in Sydney of the rejects. And we demonstrated again, and the Premier who was opening the exhibition said, "I don't care what you do, nothing's going to happen." Within a month, the act was changed. How about that? So that altered the whole nature of the Archibald Prize, which I still think is a chook raffle.
And you went on to win it.
And I even went on to win it. Oh, well, that's life.
I was talking about the joy that children have in art when they begin, before they become perhaps corralled by the process of formal teaching. When did you begin? Was the first time that you put pen or crayon to paper?
4 years old. 4 years old. I mean, there was... You see, if you're a real artist, that you have a disease known as galloping art. And medically, they have found no way of extricating that virus. It's a kind of an inner drive. It's more than an itch, it's a compulsive thing, and you are. You don't need grants or anything, you are. That's the vital thing, because you are in the feeling thing. That's what you are.
So it's a genetic predisposition?
I believe so, because like persons that don't have that drive, they can be very good, but never get to the top of it.
You go to art school, where and when?
Let me say first of all that there were no pictures. Sid Nolan was the same. There were no pictures in the house. We never went to the Art Gallery of New South Wales. I'd never been there. And my early years was really doing cartoons like Nolan did. Like Charlie Blackman's the same thing. And then I decided I'd really like to draw properly. So I went to Julian Ashton's art school, which was a classic school in Sydney. And there were all the people I wanted to meet. What a lovely thing that is. And it all like, what happened then is that I became aware of the great traditions of Without that awareness, you don't really make it, because you become like an absorption of the grand tradition, the big river. Dylan Thomas puts it another way. He said, I tried everything. I tried Malame, I tried to write poetry like Keats and so on. And if Eskimo Nell hadn't been written, I would have had to go at it. So that's what it's like. Like you become a kind of a vessel for this culture, tradition. I'm a traditionalist. Hard to believe, but I am.
You and I vividly recall a time of the cultural cringe in Australia when we felt ourselves second, third rate, and all the real excitement, all the real creativity was elsewhere. Is that what sent you off to Spain?
Well, yes. Well, it wasn't a cringe so much. It was because it's very hard for some of us to remember, but Australia was still emerging from this tyranny of distance, as Geoffrey Blainey puts it. And we were an immensely sort of isolated country. It was before, say, this alacrity now in which a young artist is saying, I'm going to New York tomorrow. You know, it wasn't like that. It was just very hard to get out of Australia. The great thing that happened for the Australian was the jumbo jet. Yeah, because it gave us this kind of urbanity, which of course we're capable of course we are. And the cultural cringe, they're not so bloody good anyway. So you know, and immediately you begin to have this kind of authority based on real education, real looking. You become a different person. You know, And it's a wonderful thing. I mean, to be involved in this kind of discourse, it's wonderful. It's the real sense of freedom because you are in the feeling business. You are sort of censoring all this kind of thing that the kind of society you're living in, but not only the society you're living in, the world that you're living in.
We sometimes go to the same coffee shop, and I have a vivid memory of you suddenly looming over me one breakfast, and you had a book with you, I forget what it was, but it was poetry, and you started reading poetry as I struggled with my coffee, and the whole restaurant, of course, was enchanted. And that reminds me of the fact that what people may not know about you is what a voracious reader you are, particularly of poetry. There's a bit of T.S. Eliot on the walls in the retrospective.
Well, you're crazy if you're not involved in poetry. Look, most of us would suffer from the fact that we've had bad poetry teachers. But, you know, poetry is really the case of the extended metaphor, that like a river becomes more than a river, as T.S. Eliot, it's in the exhibition there. I do not know much about gods, but for me, the river is a big brown god. Now, you could say that over the Yarra, but the fact is that it becomes more than water flowing. Or I'll put it to you in another way. There is a poem by that wonderful Irish poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and he loves things being dappled and varied. Now, just experience this. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies as couple-coloured as a brinded cow, rose moulds upon a trout that swims, feshford, chestnuts, finches' wings, whatever is fickled, freckled, who knows why. Praise him. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? You know, and I'm able, Philip, if just pardon me, when I was asked to do the mural in the Sydney Opera House, I fortunately fell upon a poem by Kenneth Slessor called Five Bells. Now, as we all understand, that the Sydney Opera House was such a controversial subject, and how much is costing. We should have more hospitals, and we should have more schools, and so on. The real fact of the matter is that the mural I did belonged and paid for by the Dobell Foundation, so it cost nothing. So I stumbled across this very lines that somehow ran in conformity to what was happening in the Sydney Opera House. Just try this one. Time that is moved by little fidget wheels is not my time. The wheels that do not move between the double and the single bell, there lies Joe, long since dead, who lies between five bells. So I go to Slessor's in the last years of his life, and he's a bored man, he's had enough. And I went to the Journalist Club where he was playing billiards, and I told him what I was doing. And he said, well, good on you, son. Man, good on you, son. And then I said, but who's Joe, long since dead? Oh, he said, we used to work on a newspaper. It was a soldier's paper in Phillip Street called the Smiths Weekly. And on Friday nights, we'd go there and we'd have our drinks and so on. And And we heard that there was a party at Mossman. And we said, oh, good, good. And there was Joe, who was one of the illustrators on the Smiths Weekly, and he was wearing an overcoat, and he put a beer bottle in each pocket. Right? And so we got onto the ferry, and Slessor describes it, these are his very words, there was much jollity. I'll leave that with you. And a big liner came past the ferry and rocked it. And then after a while they said, where's Joe? Joe had fallen overboard and went straight down to the bottom. And his body was never found. Coincidentally again, that they believe that he fell off right at Bennelong Point where the Sydney Opera House is. Now, how's that for landing on your feet? It's just, it's just an incredible thing. Long, so low, John long since dead, who lies between 5 bells. 5 bells is the death watch.
I think it's fascinating that an Australian artist working in Spain is also inspired by a poet writing in Wales. You and I were discussing the fact that we both discovered Dylan Thomas at about the same time, and you were immensely influenced by his play for voices for radio, for wireless, under Milkwood. Later you would describe Watson's Bay, where you lived for many years, as your little Welsh village. Talk to me about you and Dylan Thomas.
I've always liked Dylan Thomas. He's got a kind of a lyrical enthusiasm. Again, I'll give you the metaphor, and you can. I'm sure you'll understand it. The poem is called "Poem in October," and it begins. It was my 30th year to heaven. How about that? And then he describes how he walks into this tiny Welsh village, and the heron-priested shore, and the cry of the birds, and the net-webbed wall where the boats are rocking backwards and forwards, and the village is asleep. Hush, hush. I love that. I really love that.
One of the things that gave me goosebumps was when he was trying to find a way to describe blackness. And he comes up with the term Bible black.
Yeah, wonderful.
And I could think of no blacker thing than Bible black. And of course later he would write that famous angry poem about the death of his father, which I know you also remember vividly.
Do not go gently into this good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the night. Yes, because he can see his father is declining. Isn't poetry wonderful? It's just fabulous. And for this kind of thing, and painting is the same thing, it's about life. And as I've said, to students when I had my art school, don't think about perfection, because immediately you're thinking of perfection, you're thinking of Leonardo's perfection, you're thinking of Hellenic sculpture of the 5th century. Perfection is your own idea, what you think is good or bad.
Talking of writers and influences, when you were in Spain, you were for a time a neighbour and friend of no less than Robert Graves. Yes,
well, Graves was not only a great novelist, but a great poet, but he was also a classical scholar. A remarkable
the Claudius novels.
The Claudius novels. Now, there was a time when I encountered Robert Graves on one of his milk runs, and he'd been invited to go to Israel by Ben Gurion. And I said, how was that? Oh, yes. He said, and then he said, I went to Rome. He had a daughter there. I went to Rome, and you know, it hasn't changed since the 5th century. Now, isn't it? I mean, you know, this is what I mean about drift. This is what I mean about, you know, like to belong to this sort of river, this great river of life and civilization. It's such a wonderful thing, and it's there for everybody.
When you walk into the exhibition, the theme park, as I like to think of it, you will walk through doors that have been painted specially for the occasion by young Mr. Olsen here, and you will see a couple of paintings that are bleak and sombre and sad. What we know of many of your triumphs, what have been some of the low points of your life?
Oh, well, you don't have 4 marriages for nothing. And there's a... Our Jesus Christ. But there is a picture there, which is a dark picture, and it's just after one of these series of unfortunate things. And in Spanish, I've called it Donde voy. And Donde voy in Spanish means where am I going? And I think that kind of sums up how I felt. It almost won the Archibald Prize. But if you lose by 1 vote, you've lost. Yeah, even though I was called to the Art Gallery of New South Wales, who said I won it. Oh dear.
I look at your paintings, and the only antecedents I can recognise are the likes of Miro. Once again, you were pretty close to him, at least physically, in Spain. Did you ever meet?
No, unfortunately, I didn't meet Miro. Miro is a great Spanish artist, but he is intrinsically Catalan, which makes him different from, say, Velázquez or Goya, which is sort of on the plateau of Madrid. Or Picasso comes from Malaga. They're different people. It's an entirely different... The thing about Miro is he's lyrical. You know, he's as light as a whisper. There's something very, very lovely about him. And in an early stage, yes, I was certainly influenced by Miro, and I would have been a fool if I wasn't.
You were born into Catholicism. I think you've left it behind, and you've done very interesting detours into all sorts of other belief systems, haven't you?
Yes, I can't exactly join the club. But in a way, I'm profoundly religious, and perhaps that brings me closer to Zen Buddhism, which means that I am approximating here, so forgive me, that the spiritual, or God, if we're going to use those terms, is known by nature, which leads to, say, you see in Chinese and Japanese art a great interest in birds and in natural things and things in flight.
Well, you have said we live in the landscape and the landscape lives in us. That comes out of Zen, surely.
It comes out of Zen, and it also something that T.S. Eliot wrote about, in which that I am in the landscape and the landscape is in me, which is an explanation of why I have really, this is only personally, I have no interest in paintings that have foreground, middle distance and background. I have this interest in nature as we encounter it, nature as we live in it, and that's principally the reason for my linear way, is that I like the way things join. I like the way things feel together. You know, it's like that you can't predict the kind of day that you're going to have in the morning. And that's the kind of feeling that I like to get in my pictures, the unexpected. That encounter of life, that moment that will not be repeated again, like the Greek philosopher Heraclitus puts it, you can't put your feet into the same river twice. That's the way I like to do it.
You said that Australia hadn't had a civil war. Well, one could argue that we had a prolonged civil war against the indigenous people. And the way you talk about landscape as being part of you as much as you're part of it has a parallel with indigenous art, doesn't it? Do you see your work as having any commonality with artists like Clifford Possum or Rover Thomas?
Yes, but only in the broader sense. I admire it enormously, as Picasso admired Aboriginal art. But let me put it this way, that their experience is totemic, or else roots to sacred places. Well, we can't share that. Our dreaming is different. And furthermore, in Aboriginal art, and you can see I do admire it, there's no light. There isn't that same kind of liberality that I feel.
One of the things you told me today, which I was surprised by, was that you paint in silence. Most artists, in my experience, have a lot of noise around them. They paint to music. Many of them tell me they paint to the radio. Some of them even paint to Late Night Live. But you paint in silence.
Well, I'm not going to compete with Beethoven or Mozart. I think it's crazy. And more and more, I feel, particularly with the acceleration of the information world, silence is the greatest thing. Oh, silence, hush. That's so precious. You know, there's a line of Yeats. It begins, keep those virgins out of the Pope's chapel. There lies Michelangelo. His hand moves backwards and forwards with no more sound than mice make. Oh, isn't that good? Oh, with no more sound than mice make.
When you do listen to music, what do you listen to?
Oh, well, I'm able to say I'm very Catholic in my taste, which that remark gets us nowhere.
I think you're ex-Catholic in your taste.
Oh, well, look, I naturally, it'd be crazy to say I love Mozart, of course Beethoven, I like Bartók, and I think our own Peter Sculthorpe's very good as well. So I have a Catholicity of taste which is engendered by classic FM, the saviour.
You read poetry voraciously.
Yeah,
Have you ever
yes.
written it?
Yes, I always do. Yes, I do. I mean, it's just natural. I don't, there's no big deal in that at all. It's something that, it's like, why does a camel go to water? You know, I'm moved by that. I feel like that. I mean, I'm in the feeling business. You know, I feel like that. I feel like that. I breathe like that. Oh, yes, lad. Oh, yes, lad. Oh, yes. That's how I am.
We were having a conversation about the passion for fashion, if you like, in art, the constant straining to do things differently. And I know that you once took Ezra Pound to task for his obsession with formal conjuring tricks.
Yes, he made an awful mistake with Eliot. Look, this idea of, say, the avant-garde, which is the cult of newness, is ridiculous. It is so ridiculous because, let me put it this way, it's not newness. When Cézanne is reinterpreting landscape, he goes to the Louvre every time he's in Paris to look at Poussin. And so what the real movements are, possibility. Possibility that Picasso could see and Braque could see in Cubism, which was a continuation from that Cézanne's remark, if you render nature in the cube, the cone and the sphere, then you get the real sense of geometry. Picasso and Braque could see that, the possibility. It's not to do with newness, it's to do with somehow coming forward with something that's really valuable. So newness is not the game. And furthermore, my objection is people saying they are avant-garde. I mean, that's an impertinence. That's ridiculous. Just consider it. I mean, it's just crap.
And yet, of course, change constantly occurs.
Yeah, we accept change. We want change.
Well, let's look at the difference between one of the high moments of Australian art, the Heidelberg School, and the changes that you have been a part of. Because it is true that you have lived through another great era of Australian painting.
Oh, yes. Well, what happened in Australia, it was just like that the Australia that we know now really began to reveal itself after the Second World War. And there were really great artists like Sidney Nolan, a great lyricist, Drysdale, Ian Fairweather. And when Nolan's pictures of the McDonnell Ranges just outside of Alice Springs, and he got a lift in the mail plane, and he could see this grass landscape, and he discovered something very valuable. Australia is best seen in its detail from the air. Now, that is such a simple thing because it is so vast and unruly, and unlike the Italian or French landscape where it's been honed, as I said before, by great philosophers, artists and so on, he discovered this reddish landscape, and when he showed them in London, the critics said he was painting the moon. Isn't that amazing, isn't it? And so, therefore, subsequently, our view of the Australian landscape is somehow different, and I see it in the terms that I'm really writing the landscape, because it crawls like this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that, and I'm following the river, and I'm sort of following its journey to Lake Eyre, and I'm doing this, but I am going on a journey with it, which is entirely different from this foreground, middle distance stuff, which doesn't tell that story.
That reminds me that our mutual friend Vince Venti was influential in your life, because it was he, I think, who took you to Lake Eyre.
Yes, it was. Vince Venti, the naturalist, was a great companion, and he could observe nature in the terms of behavioural patterns. And Lake Eyre, of course, is a great enigma. It's a vast inland sea, and most of the time it's covered with salt. But occasionally it's filled. Now, to give you an idea of this, that when you approach Lake Eyre by air, when it's full, you cannot see anything else but water. There is no horizon. But given like a 3-year cycle, it's a complete salt lake, a salt lake that Malcolm Campbell broke the land speed test in 1965. That's what it's like. There it is, there it isn't.
You've made the point to me before that Australia is a land without horizon.
Yeah, well, that's a
English art, of course, is full of horizons.
Yeah, Phil, but I think the horizon is like Fred Williams was good at horizons.
Okay, well, let me put it a different way. When we think of traditional landscapes, we tended to be acclimatised to European concepts of beauty and prettiness and order. When you get to Hill End, which is a very important discovery for you, and it's where journey to You Beaut Country begins in a way, you liked the untidiness. You liked a little bit of chaos, as opposed to prettiness.
Well, it's a different sense of beauty insofar as that my own feeling is that the European landscape is more, shall I say, geometrical, whereas the essential thing of the Australian landscape is its untidiness. It sprawls. It's like a dog's hind leg. You know, it doesn't conform to those kind of ordered patterns. The kind of balance is not the same. It sprawls. I like that. I really like that.
I want to ask you a very personal question. Frogs.
Well, that comes out of Chinese art, really. But how it happened to me is that I was up in North Queensland with a wildlife crew from the ABC. Ken Taylor was the director. And we're under this tree, and he pulled down this tiny frog, which was just like that, very small, and it had little pads on the end of its feet and fingers where it could hang from trees. And I thought that was marvellous, and I did some drawings and some watercolours on it, and it went like a rage. The whole world is frog lovers. It's bigger than Ned Kelly's helmet, let me tell you. And it bloody terrifies me. But, you know, what I like about it is this. A frog is enthusiastic. I like its metaphors. It's how it comes from a tadpole and then gradually mutates into a frog. And there it's something different. And then I encounter a poem. There is a marvelous Japanese poet called Basho, in which now a haiku is a very, very short poem, and it says, old pond, frog jumps in, the sound of water. That is one of the most famous poems in the Japanese language. Now, what does that mean? Old pond, right? That's very old. It's still, in my imagination, green. Eternity. And there is the frog, and it decides to leap, and we're following that, and plop. And then the rings around it are like that. End of thought. Simple. Something beautiful about it.
Another personal question, in fact it's the last question. You're now in your late 80s, I'm not far behind you. We have to face the issue of mortality. How do you feel about death?
It's a nature's law, I'll put it to you this way. We have the seed, we have the stem, we have the blossom, and then it passes. All life is the same. Goodbye. Goodbye. Yoo-hoo. It was nice knowing you. Now, I want to, before we go, Phillip, because I'll do this very quickly, because I'm sure that you'd like this, that when Dobell won the Archibald Prize, and we're all students, and we used to sing this song. William Dobell is me name, twistin' faces is me game, at distortion I'm just whiz, 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 I'll twist every face there is, all around the gallery was the same. By twist, 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 I rose to fame, 'cause I'm the darling of the gallery, and William Dobell is my name.
I wanted you to sing that. I wanted you to sing that an hour ago. You're a very difficult interviewee. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap from Late Night Live, coming to you from the National Gallery of Victoria, a special edition celebrating the life and art of John Olsen on the eve of the opening of this major retrospective. John, a delight. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to sing you another song. This is Drysdale's. I mean, look, as fellow artists, we do have fun, and we do. But Drysdale had a family that had very rich properties in the Riverina, and he was brought up there. So when Tassie, who was known as Tassie, had a few glasses, he'd sort of sing, and after a while we knew it, and it goes like this. The Riverina Boys are happy, the Riverina Boys are free, the Riverina Boys are happy when they are on a spree. They never, never worry, and they never drink, never disapprove. 'Cause the watchword of the Riverina Boys is, come and have a drink with me. Can you put one down? My bloody oath I can.